Alrighty, I have been asked to do another video for lettering applique. So not only am I going to do that in this video, but this video is also going to be specific to the Brother single needle flatbed that we have, which does not recognize stop commands and trims. So certainly the applique is easier on the commercial machine that we have because it'll stop and trim on command. Single needle, not so much. I'm going to show you if you have a single needle flatbed and it does not recognize the stop and trim command of Inkstitch, this video should help you out figure out how to do that. When you're doing a applique, you're going to use system fonts and not Inkstitch fonts. And I'll show you that too. Let's go ahead and set up our document. The single needle hoop that I have is a 6x4. So our width is going to be 6 inch by 4 inch high. And I'm going to stay inside of that. I think that's what it is. 5x7. I think it's a 5x7. Let's go ahead and make a 5x7. Width will be 7 and height 5. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure I stay inside that. And if I'm wrong about that, I can adjust it pretty easy. But this'll still work. So we're going to use a system font, and your system fonts is this lettering tool over here on the side. Right here. I'm going to click that. Now I have the lettering tool. I'm going to make a large LTL. And I'll even keep it italicized. I like that. I'm going to make sure it's as bold as it can be, which it looks like it is. I'm going to slide that into place. And we're going to be working from this. And you can make it fatter if you want to. And let's go ahead and make it just a little bit bigger. Okay. So for the fill, I don't want any fill. I'm going to push the shift button and is it shift button? No. I'm going to not push the shift button and hit that little X down here at the bottom. So now I no longer have any fill. And let's go ahead and push the shift button and select black. So now I have a black outline so I can see it better. Go to fill and tool, fill and stroke tool, path, the path, object. It is object, fill, and stroke. Right here will get you to where I am over here. And stroke paint, stroke style. I'm going to set the stroke style down a little bit just so it looks more like a line, like I want it to be. And then I'm going to, now when you're working with system fonts, you have to tell it, change that font into a path in order for SVG, in order for Inkscape, SVG, and Inkstitch to work with it. So I'm going to select path, object to path. I'm going to go to path, break apart. Now I have my 3 separate items. You need at least 1 layer that is a running stitch and 1 layer that is the satin stitch. And optionally, you can do a 3rd layer, the first 2 being running stitch, the 3rd one being a satin stitch. This is the way that my girls like to do it. They like that first running stitch to go down on the main fabric so that they can put the applique fabric over the top of that and make sure that their little piece of applique fabric is going to fit inside the lines. And then do another running stitch to tack that down, and then the satin stitch will clean up the edges. So that's optional depending on if you want to do it that way. I am going to do it that way because that's the way I usually do it for the ladies in the house. So after we've done this part, I need to go to extensions. Let's see. Go ahead and highlight all 3 of these. And then I'm going to group them. So it'll be like group 1, group 2, group 3, group. Now I have the first group. And on that first group, we're going to make sure that that is a running stitch. Params. It is a running stitch. You can see that it's all running stitch. Go ahead and apply and quit. Okay, this is my first running stitch layer. I'm going to have 2 running stitch layers. The first one, I'm not too concerned about it trimming. I just want to make sure that the jumps are in order. They don't go over the top of each other. Let's go ahead and look at that. Look at that again. It looked like there was some jumps going over the top. So it's doing the last one first. Okay. And that's a jump. That's a jump. Okay, so I'm going to change the order of those. Remember that bottom stitches first, and then Inkstitch goes up in that order. So I want that one to be last in the bottom up direction, and then that one to be first. So it'll be on the bottom. So now it'll go in the order that I want it to go. So let's look at that again and make sure there's no jump overs. Okay, there's a jump over right here. Should be able to trim that out pretty easy with a pair of scissors. So it's going to stitch this first LTL. And then I'm going to take a pair of scissors and just get rid of those jumps. That'll be fine. Now I want to duplicate this group. Duplicate. Now I have another group doing the same thing. I want this group. I want to make sure that the machine doesn't just do the first set of running stitches and go straight into the second one. I need it to stop. And since my machine doesn't recognize Inkstitch's stop and trim commands, what I'm going to do is change the color. I'm going to push Shift so that it's a stroke color and just pick a color. It doesn't matter what color it is. You're just telling the machine that it needs to stop long enough for you to change colors. I'm not going to actually change the colors. I just need it to stop. And your machine doesn't know what color thread is on it, so that part doesn't matter. So, having done that, now, let's see. I want it to stop in between each letter, so I'm going to pick the middle one, and I'm going to change that color too. Doesn't matter what color it is, you just need to change the color so that the machine is going to stitch out this L, and then it's going to trim the thread and stop and wait for you to put on a new color thread. You don't actually change the thread. You're just tricking the machine into stopping long enough for you to put down another piece of fabric. So what happens is, first thing that happens is we stitch these so that we can look at it. There's our design, put a piece of fabric down. And the reason they like to do that is because we often use just a leftover remnant piece of fabric when we're doing appliques, and you can take your little piece and set it on the stitched out design and see if it's going to fit. So it's going to stitch all these out. I'm going to trim them with a pair of scissors, and it's going to stop because it's going to stop long enough for me to change the thread. Even though I'm not changing the thread, I'm putting down a piece of fabric because I told it to change the color. So now it's going to stitch. I'm going to put down a piece of fabric, and now it's going to stitch what I indicate red here. And then it's going to stop because the next one is a color change. It's going to stop again. I'm going to put down another piece of fabric, and then it's going to stitch the different color thread. And then it's going to stop because I'm changing color threads again. And then it's going and put my applique piece down, and then it's going to stitch out the last L. And then we're going to change colors going into the satin stitch so that it will stop long enough for us to cut the fabric. Now that we've got it all stitched down, we need to cut that fabric really close so that when we do our satin stitch, the cut pieces of fabric are going to be inside of that satin stitch. There's a lot. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bottom one, I'm going to duplicate that one, because that one doesn't have 3 different color changes, kind of starting fresh. So duplicate that one. Now we're right here. Now this one, I've got all my appliques down. I've got them all trimmed up nice and neat. This one can run the 3 letters out and I don't have to stop it. That's why I did the bottom one, because they're all one color. And since the last color here, the last color on the last applique tack down was red, and now it's going to switch back to black, it's going to stitch this last tack down, and then it's going to stop and wait for me to change the thread. But I'm not changing the thread, I'm cutting the fabric. Put the hoop back on the machine, and then I'm going to let it run these 3 LTLs as a satin stitch to neaten the edge up. But I need these to be a satin. We're going to go into extensions. Let's see. We're going to go to fill and stroke, back to fill and stroke. We're going to set a width, however wide you want that satin stitch to be. Let's see what 4 looks like. It might be too much. That looks pretty good. I think that'll do on this piece. And it's entirely up to you. I think 4 mil is probably a pretty good starting point. That's a pretty wide satin stitch. So I have fat man hands. So when I'm doing my little applique trimming, I don't really get as close to the stitch down point as, say, maybe the young ladies in the house do. So when I'm cutting out the piece, I need to make up for being impatient, for one. I don't get close because I'm impatient and I try to do it quickly. And I know this. So to make up for knowing this, I make a wider satin stitch. So now that that is set, now I'm going to set that to be a satin stitch. We're going to go to Inkstitch, Tool Satin, and Convert Line to Satin. And that's actually it. Now I'm going to clean this satin up to where you've seen me clean up the auto satin before, and it's not a big deal. But I'm going to clean this auto satin up so that it makes a nicer satin stitch. And that means pulling this over, pulling this one over. You've seen me do this before. Pulling that up, pulling that down, straightening that out a little bit. And actually doing that little pre-curve that I like to do. Just like that. Scoot that over a little bit. I'm going to scoot this one up a little bit. You've seen me do this before. It's not a big deal. I did that one the wrong way. It's supposed to be that way. Okay. And then up here, same thing. We're going to pull this one over. Okay, now having done all this, we should get a pretty good result out of that. Oh, I messed up something down here. I don't know what I did there. All right, but it's fixed now. So, one layer to show me where to put the applique fabric, one layer to tack down the applique fabric, and one layer that's satin stitch to clean around the edges. And we are, let's go ahead and do a preview of all this. Extensions, Inkstitch, simulate, realistic preview. Make sure everything looks pretty good. And it does have a lot of color changes, but those are my stop points. And once this gets done, then we'll unselect jumps so that we can see what it looks like without all the jumps, because it's not going to actually end up with all the jumps. And we'll fast forward through that. Okay, that looks pretty good. So unrender jumps. So there's no jumps. That's what it looks like. And then render realistic, which I should have done that in the other direction, but I think it'll work. I just have to click and then unclick jumps. Okay. So this should be, relatively speaking, what it looks like with a piece of fabric inside of each letter. That obviously we can't see, but this should be pretty darn close. And I'm going to go ahead and save this. We'll throw it onto a USB drive. Let me go ahead and save this. Save as. Now, I've told you this before. I'm going to repeat it repeatedly. Anytime you're working with an SVG in Inkscape, you've done all that work. You've done all that work to it. Please save it as an SVG first. And then if you need to make adjustments, you're working on the SVG. You're not working on the embroidery file, because Inkstitch doesn't like to work on embroidery files. It likes to work on Inkscape SVGs. So save it as the SVG first. If you have to make adjustments on that SVG and then save over that. So I've saved it as a SVG. Now I'm going to save it as Brother will work with either a DST or a PES. Since everything we do in the house is a DST, I'm going to save it as a DST, and I'm going to work on it. I'm going to work on the Brother single flatbed using that DST file. Just in case you don't know or didn't know, Brothers will work with DST files. So I'm going to save that as the DST. And then I can throw that onto a thumb drive, which I have a multitude of here. So here we are. We're watching the machine do its thing. And again, this first step is optional. The layout of the design. You could skip this part and go straight to setting your applique fabric in place and having it stitch it. So I'm going to do a little bit of skipping and jumping ahead. Some just repetitive parts that don't need to be seen over and over again. And after it gets the L done, I'm going to trim the couple of jump stitches before I lay my applique fabric in place. I'm going to put the tray back, the hoop tray back in place. And then I'm going to lay my first piece of fabric. I've got 3 different colors of fabric, 3 different material. of fabric just to really demonstrate the way to do different pieces. And that one is now stitched. I'm going to pull the hoop out. I'm going to do a rough cut just to keep that piece of fabric out of the way of the next applique piece of fabric. Again, just a really rough cut just to keep it out of the way. Put the hoop tray back in place and set my next piece of applique fabric in place. And now that one is stitched down. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to take the tray out. I'm going to do a rough cut just to keep that piece of fabric out of the way. Place my next piece of fabric in and let it stitch down. So now we pull that hoop out, we take it to the table, and we do a nice clean trim of all of the pieces. So the big scissors are for doing the rough cut, and then the little orange scissors that you see, they have a curved face to them. So it makes it a whole lot easier to get close to your piece of fabric when you're trimming it. I'm not very good at it. I did a couple of minor oopsies on. I didn't trim a couple of places close enough. You'll see that in the end piece. Yeah, I'm not good at trimming delicately. I'm not good at doing anything delicately. But yeah, so skip forward on this a little bit. And now I'm using the tweezers and the little tiny curved scissors. Definitely makes it much easier for me to do this. And I apologize for not placing the camera in the work piece better. But you get the idea. And there's a little close up of the curved scissors. And the end product of the trimming. Yeah, I could have done a little better. And now it all goes back onto the machine. Remember not to turn your machine off or change any settings, because it needs to run each piece, each section. And we go ahead and run it. Now it's doing the little satin stitch around the outside, around the outside. And you can see right there a little piece that I should have trimmed a little better. I'm not good at that part. Well, they don't let me in the sewing room unless they're not busy. And we're gonna zoom forward in a whole lot of this. And that was me doing what you shouldn't be doing and reaching in there with a pair of scissors while it's running. Don't ever do that. I'm just showing you an example of what not to do, okay? Part of my demonstration. All right. Let's get that off of there and take a look at the finished product. I also took a nice little picture and we'll get a little closer to it. Now, you can see there's a couple of places here that need improvement. And one of those is trimming closer on my part. Trimming closer here and over here. Rest of it looks pretty good. I missed a little spot there. Not bad. Not too bad. The other thing I'm going to show you in the params is to set the satin stitch settings so that it's a little bit tighter of a stitch. And that will reduce the gaps that are in between. It's not bad. Like right here, right up through here on the edge. You can see some gaps where there's some of that applique fabric showing through in between the individual stitchings. I'll show you how to tighten that up a little bit and improve that look. But for a very first test stitch, this is not bad. This is not bad at all. I'll take it. Okay, so let's go ahead and get out of that. Go ahead and get out of that. Let's bring up our, okay, now, again, in this video, I said, make sure you save SVG first. Don't edit the applique or the embroidery file. So I have my SVG that I saved in case I needed to edit. And it's going to come into play here because I need to edit this and fix a couple of minor things. One major minor thing, the only real minor thing I need to fix is params on that satin stitch. So we're going to bring up the params on that satin stitch and we're going to set that a little tighter. So what we need to change is this right here where it says zigzag spacing peak to peak. That is the distance between threads, between each stitching. So that we're going to change. You can change that to a 0.35 or change it to a 0.3. I'm going to go with a 0.3 and I think that's going to change it nicely. And you can also see, let me change it back to the default 0.4. We have just in the satin stitch, outside, around the outside, around the outside. It's got 3,296 stitches. When we change it to a 0.3, we go up 1,000 stitches, 4,366. Almost exactly 1,000 stitches. So, a lot more stitches, a lot closer together. I don't think I would dare to go much less than 0.3 on this, and it should make the stitching look very nice. I'm not going to run another test. This is how you do an applique. This is how you go back in and edit your SVG and fix it. So I'm going to apply and quit. I'm going to hit save. Just save that SVG. Now I'm going to hit save as. And I'm going to change that to DST, which is going to save over the top of the one I already have. It's going to say, this already exists. Do you want to replace it? Yes, I do. So that's how you edit to fix a problem and then save over the top of the SVG or DST. Put the DST back on the, overwrite the DST that's on the thumb drive. Go for another test stitching. I'm not going to do another test stitching. That's going to be all for this video. I think it turned out very nicely. And as always, I thank you so much for watching.